I apologize in advance for that, but I will just speak louder if that happens, kind of like what happens in school. The funny part was I was going to go into school today and do the talk from my office, and they started to demolish the concrete steps in front of the building. So it was very loud there too. So can't get away from construction, but the good news is progress, things are moving forward, things are getting repaired, and life is going on. So I'm really glad that you could all join us. I'll just really briefly tell you a little bit about myself and what we hope to accomplish together in the next hour. As Amanda said, my name is Laura Buzas, and I am lucky enough to have worked, in education for 27 years. I started my career at the high school level. I spent a handful of time at the middle school. I actually worked at Mount Pleasant and Schenectady. And then I went down to the elementary. I was the principal in Schenectady for a while. And a couple years ago, I made the transition to Ravenna, Clement, Selkirk, and I'm the principal of the middle school. And so I learned a lot just by various experiences. And I know that what's before us is quite a bit of change. If you haven't already experienced immense change as we look forward to reopening, there's a lot of change being presented to us as educators, and it's a tough time to be in the field. What I've learned from all the change, every time I made a career change, as scary as it was, each of those career changes were wonderful teachers for me. I learned so much in each and every experience that I've been blessed to have. And so I wanted to open this with a somewhat of the type of restorative circle rounds you might do with students, and thinking about how you might transition to do these type of rounds with students in a virtual way. If you are going back in some form, you may be going back hybrid, or even if you're going back fully in person, like many of our elementary schools are, you may have a large group of students who are also working from home, whose families chose that. So in thinking about this, the first round, and imagine in a restorative circle way, you are allowed to pass, and we would have norms set ahead of time. What is one silver lining that you can celebrate during COVID-19? What is one thing that you found, of the many things that I'm sure you've probably found as we're all searching for positivity, that you can look forward to or celebrate? And then while you're stopping and jotting about that, could you also stop and jot about the most challenging behaviors that you're facing, things that you think of, and then take a moment to rank them from those behaviors that irritate you the most to those behaviors that irritate you the least, because we'll use that later in the presentation. You take about 3 minutes for this and put up in the chat any questions, thoughts, or contributions you'd like to make to the group while you do that.
So it works nicely if you're comfortable putting your round one answer in the chat, your silver lining during COVID. We would love to see it. The round two, where you're making a list, you're going to just keep that for yourself and hang on to it for later in the presentation. Is that okay, Laura?
Yes, thank you for clarifying. So I can see some of you sharing your silver linings, and it's amazing. Some of them are finding the hope in the little things. It's funny, like being able to go to the bathroom whenever you need to. We know we as teachers, that's a coveted thing, because so often that's not the reality of our life. Spending time with family is something that I think so many of us are finding as a blessing. And speaking of which, the hour that this presentation is, my family might come in and I might have to shush them. I'll be like that bad recreation of Zoom or Google Meet. Funny story, this isn't a silver lining, but I often found myself sitting on this sofa when I was doing meetings from home. And in the beginning, when we were, even us as administrators were completely virtual, we were all home and I was meeting in a PTSO meeting with families. And my husband walked across, and you can see this mirror behind me. He walked across in his boxer shorts. And I didn't realize he did that. I wasn't even paying attention. And all of a sudden, one of the moms on the PTSO, their face got really red and they started to laugh. And that's when I realized, so I have this mirror behind me. So if you see me make a face or you see my child in the background, they're 17 and 19, and they might cause a slight disruption in the presentation. But thank you so much for sharing the silver linings that you're finding in this. I think it's so important for us to have some positivity. So one of the ideas around this presentation is to think about the kind of where we've been in education, and sort of how do we make sense of the variety of programs that have been in place before. If you've been in the field for a while, you've probably seen PBIS come to life and then die back down and then maybe come to life again. And it sort of tends to be this approach that doesn't ever really go away, but when not executed fully, doesn't always feel like the most successful. Responsive classroom, morning meeting, closing meeting of the day, hopes and dreams, working with your students to respond to misbehavior and behavior and things happening in your room rather than react, has been around started out in Maine for quite a while as well. And it too has its surges, I think, in our field. And then restorative practices more recently, but growing in my opinion, quite a rapid pace, has been the next sort of approach that I would like to spend the next hour sort of sharing with you how we can bring together these three approaches. So rather than feeling as though we're on to the next thing and we're throwing out what we've always relied on, how do we take what we relied on, tried and true practices, and add layers of new and improved approaches? Simultaneously, I will take some questions and try to pause to talk about how you might switch gears and do some of this work remotely. So we know that relationships are at the heart of all three of these approaches, that PBIS, responsive classroom, and restorative practices are all about building a community. And in that community, the voice of students is really important. I kind of put on the outside traditional consequences and interventions because I also want to talk to you about where I believe we went wrong with some of these approaches. And I'll start with PBIS. So when you think about PBIS as a whole school system of behavior, one of the areas where schools most often struggled was on the intervention part of things. So what happens when the tier one implementation, if you even fit, which often my schools, in my experience, we didn't fit the traditional triangle of your tier one, what everybody gets, all students get, that comprising about 85% of your student body, about 10% requiring tier two, more small group intervention, and then about 5% requiring that tier three, more individualized one-to-one intervention and support. PBIS, when implemented, struggled, although they do have companion programs that are intervention based, struggled with addressing the tier two and tier three parts of our student population, which was especially challenging if your school triangle didn't fit the typical 85, 10, 5. Mine typically did not, meaning that I had more students falling into tier two and tier three than I had supports in place to help them. So as you think about that, I want you to think about the parts of PBIS that you yourself might have criticized or that folks that you work with might have criticized. And one for me that a lot of folks would often bring up is this argument against extrinsic motivators. PBIS is based on an incentive, a structure of incentives, and a structure of celebrations based on those incentives. And what often happens is you'll get that argument of, well, shouldn't people be intrinsically motivated? I don't need extrinsic motivators to come to work. Students shouldn't need intrinsic motivators to come to school. I want to push your thinking a little bit on that and give you an opportunity to have some talking points if you want to push others thinking around this. Because what happens is we're not all born with the same level of motivation. And life affects us all differently, especially now that's become clear to us. This institute around trauma sensitive approaches to school, we know that for a variety of reasons, students come and they're not all just inherently coming with the level of intrinsic motivation that we would like them to. So, can you teach motivation? And if you can, because I argue you can, how do you teach it? And I believe that one way that you increase intrinsic motivation is in the beginning by using extrinsic motivators for support. Just thinking about that for a moment, I want you to draw a T chart if you would, and then you can put some of your thinking in the chat after we pause if you're willing. And especially if you have any questions, please add those. Because I know I'm doing a lot of talking at you and it's hard to be interactive when I can't see you and you don't have the ability to talk. So we're learning, and we really hope that you at least get some interactive component this afternoon by putting things into the chat or posing your questions in the chat. So if you draw a T-chart on the left side, would you please put administrator consequences? And I want you to think about all the different consequences that an administrator has at their disposal. And then I want you on the right side to put teacher or other staff member, the consequences that you may have if you are in those roles, or if you're not, use your imagination to say, what consequences does a teacher have at their disposal? And then we'll talk about, kind of my thinking around consequences and what has to be connected to a consequence in order for them to have the desired outcome. And I'll give you a minute to do that. So again, just have that T chart, brainstorming administrator consequences on the left and teacher consequences on the right. And while you're doing that, what I will tell you about the consequences that I, have at my disposal as an administrator of a middle school, where I've grown my thinking is around, I always say to myself, how is this consequence going to reteach the expectation? And if this consequence involves a removal from the classroom, from the area, any student removal, no matter how temporary, how am I going to successfully reintegrate that student back into the environment so that they don't feel shame, or they kind of carry around any lingering emotions or sadness that will cause them to go right back to what got them out of the environment in the first place. And as you're thinking about that, we'll revisit that list. And I'll pause for a second in case there is anything that anybody wants to ask or add any thinking. Okay, so we'll revisit that list when we get to thinking about responsive classroom and we talk about logical consequences. I will like you at that point to re-pull out your list and review, are there any parts of your consequences that are not logical? And what I mean by that is that will not actually reteach the desired outcomes or the expected behaviors. So for an example, if a student is being unsafe in line, maybe they're hands-on, a logical consequence, often what we would do, right, is take something away. Maybe they have a loss of recess, or if they're older and they're hands-on in the cafeteria or something, maybe they'll go to lunch detention, or there'll be some removal from the environment. And we're hoping that that punishment, if you will, because that's really what it is at that point, will be significant enough for the child to say, oh, I didn't like the way the punishment felt, so I won't do that behavior again. But what we've learned is that's often not the case. And so when you think about logical consequences, you want to think about, is the consequence connected to the misbehavior, and does it reteach? So for example, if it were line behavior, a more logical consequence might be a specific line placement for that child temporarily, where the appropriate line behavior can be modeled and reinforced. And then you would allow the child you allow them to know specifically what they need and to be able to do to get back to having free line choice, or however else you do lines, if that makes sense. So I will talk more about that, but to get us back to PBIS specifically, One of the parts of PBIS that I think all of us as educators crave is structure. And PBIS provides that. It provides structures like voice level systems, hallway procedures, expectations in the bathroom, expectations in the cafeteria, and it makes those expectations widely known to all stakeholders, widely communicated. But like anything, for the structure to stick, you have to nurture it, reteach, hold accountable, and take care of those structures. The same is true with rewards. PBIS offers some type of incentive system. It could be a token economy, there's school-wide celebrations, you might do weekly or monthly behavior awards. Inside of that, you have to be really mindful about those rewards. Are they doable for me inside of my classroom? Are they realistic? Do I feel as though the incentives are attached to what I'm rewarding them for? Am I physically saying every time a student earns the reward why they got the reward, because that in and of itself serves as a reinforcement for the expectations I want to see. So for example, if you're rewarding responsibility and that's one of your expectations, and the student has all their materials out and they're ready to go every time exactly when you ask them to, we want to reward that. You want to make sure that that student can notice and name specifically why they were rewarded. And then the last part, which I'll get into more with responsive classroom and restorative practices, is interventions, because I feel this is why we often would abandon PBIS, because we were noticing that it was working great for the students who needed very little redirection, students who came to school and were able to follow the routines of school without much additional support from us. What do you do at the tier 2 and tier 3 levels for the students that what's working at the tier 1 for the other students is not working? I'd like to add to your thinking around those two a little bit more. So another T-chart, and that's sort of just briefly to give you a way to do a needs assessment throughout my presentation. If you would take a second to draw another T-chart, and again, feel free to add any questions into the chat or any ideas you have around this thinking. But what you want to do if you say to yourself, I do really want to make tighter the structures in my classroom or the structures in my school building as they pertain to PBIS or just in general, what you want to do is you want to be really specific about those structures. I want a noise level structure. For when I was principal of an elementary school, for us, what we decided as a staff community was the chime. It's a little less, it can be a little less successful at the middle and high school level because of just the nature of that age group and the chime. I think it can still work if it fits your personality, because again, it's all about relationships. But at the elementary level, we could get the attention of an entire auditorium, an entire assembly with 500 children in it, ranging from age 4 to age 11, in less than 3 seconds. It became that effective. However, as a structure, it didn't become that effective by accident. We had to work at it for weeks, and the teachers had to reinforce it inside of their classrooms. And so when we came together as a school community, the entire school in an assembly, which we did often, that chime became essential, kids knew. Another structure, if you think about structure, might be the routines and expectations when a student enters the classroom. So that might be something that you would list on the structure side of your T-chart. On the reward side, you want to think about what incentives, and remember, they don't have to cost anything and they don't have to be food-based, because there is a lot of talk around, you know, having nutritious snacks and not serving students unhealthy foods throughout the day as a reward. So if you're sort of in that line of thinking, you want to say, what types of rewards can I sustain? And what types of rewards or incentives might I offer that are free or low cost? Because that's part of sustainability too. So let me give you an example. One of the I used to, one of the coveted things, and you can work with your administrators to do these rewards. One of the coveted things that we did was allowing the students choice over who they had lunch with. A lot of times they would choose in in this hotter months, if you're not blessed, I now work in a school that has central air. I didn't know that existed in New York. It's the first time in my 27-year career that I ever worked in a building that had central air conditioning. In my old elementary school, the only place that had air conditioning was the office. So students in the hotter months, that would be a very coveted thing. They would choose lunch with a friend in the office, and they would come and sit in either my office or in the main office if that was who they chose to eat with. So thinking in those lines, you can offer incentives that are free or very low cost, and they actually have side benefits, because being able to bond with students over lunch is another opportunity, another teaching and learning opportunity. So I'll pause for just a second to let you catch up on your list. So if you have any questions about rewards or incentives or any thoughts around it that you want me to address, feel free to put that in the chat. And Amanda will have me pause so that I can take a moment to answer your questions or to address any of your thinking. But I'll move on in the meantime to responsive classroom. So what I want you to kind of transition your mind is, if PBIS is tier 1, and I do that for everyone, and so my entire school has routines, systems, procedures, and structures and common language that works no matter what. Anybody in theory should be able to work with your students if the common language is working. So for example, if I have to go into your cafeteria to help out, but I'm not normally the person, if I know what the common expectations are and I know what the common language is, in theory, I should be able to step into your shoes and work with your class without too many issues. That's how we can always test, are our structures working? Responsive classroom gets at it a little more deeply, and it gets at it a little bit more from the perspective of intervention. So when it doesn't work, when PBIS isn't enough and you have students that need more, responsive classroom is a great way to begin to look at what the more can be. And at one point in a moment, I'll ask you to take out your list of consequences so you can sort of star, highlight, circle, whatever works for you, the consequences you believe are logical. Because in my opinion, the folks who have the abundance of logical consequences at their disposal is not the principal. And it isn't because I can speak for myself as a principal, because I don't feel it is my job to support the behaviors. I know that is the job. That is one of the most important and essential parts of my work. But how I look at it is, it's really to support the teacher so that they can support the behaviors, because a couple different reasons. If the logical consequence comes from me, that's a hidden gem of an opportunity. I've now bonded with that child. I'm the one doing the teaching to that child. I am the one reframing the expectation and simultaneously sort of taking an opportunity to connect with that child. I don't actually need to be the one to do that, because I won't be the one the next day, if you're in a middle school or high school kind of period spell schedule, or the next portion of the day if you're in an elementary and you have them all day. I'm not going to be the one holding them to the expectations that they very likely didn't meet. The teachers would be. So how do I best support the teacher to have that moment with the student? So often, sort of where I've shifted my thinking now is, if the teacher's amenable to it, I go in and cover their class so they can have a moment with the student, so that they're able to give some type of logical consequence and take a chance, take that opportunity to teach the student, but reteach the expectations and sort of get to know why, what's going on, what is the need. When I think of behavior, I often think about the competing needs inside of a classroom. Often the teacher's need and the student's need can come into competition with one another. And that's what very often leads to power struggles. And we want to avoid power struggles to the greatest degree possible, because there's always a loser in the power struggle, right? It sets up a win-lose scenario, and typically the person who loses would be the student, because if the power struggle devolves enough, the teacher has to ask the student to leave. And so, in my opinion, both the teacher and the student lose in that scenario, because you no longer have the student and the student's no longer afforded the instruction. However, using responsive classroom language will give you some power and we'll avoid many of those pitfalls that we all fall into. So take a second, now that you have your consequences in your mind, take a second to also look at those irritating behaviors. If you don't mind, I would love for some of you to start throwing up some of those irritating behaviors into the chat so that I can begin to talk to you about some of the responses you might try if you haven't already to address some of those irritating behaviors. While you're doing that, while you're thinking of now I'm starting to irritate you because I want you to think about all the things that most irritate you when you're in the classroom, but I want to also empower you. So when I think of responsive classroom language, I think first about the bulk of your work being around using reinforcing language. I want you to think about any skill that you teach, anything that you teach, anything. So a skill, if you want to think of a difficult skill. So if I'm a reading teacher and I'm teaching struggling readers, teaching inference can be really hard, especially if that student has needs in the area of phonics, or, so much of their brain power is spent on decoding that, making the space to infer can be really challenging. So you got to give them lots of strategies on how to infer. And it can be frustrating, right? Because it takes a long time for that skill to start to grow more secure. I would like to push you to think of behavior in the same ways. So if you are teaching a high school student, a challenging skill of being able to collect, analyze, and synthesize data, and then make informed decisions to create a thesis statement or an argument, if you will, about that data, that's a skill that you would probably spend several class periods teaching, reinforcing, modeling, showing them examples of it at work, and then giving them actionable feedback when they submit their writing. You might write right on the paper, or you might, if it's in a Google Classroom forum, you might use the comments feature, but you would be giving them lots and lots of actionable feedback, right? So to reinforce that is really important. Behavior is no different. If you want to teach the skill of entering the room and getting straight to work, you want to teach the skill of the bell ringer or the anticipatory set or whatever you're using to sort of absorb the students into the lesson, then you have to reinforce that. And reinforcing language is a lot like PBIS when sometimes they said 4-to-1, your positivity should be 4 times more often than you addressing misbehavior. Sometimes they said 5-to-1. Regardless of the numbers, reinforcing language is extremely powerful. It's noticing all of the expectations that they're following and giving them credit for following them. Recently, I received an email. It was a scolding email, scolding many of us, even though a very small portion of the faculty was, I guess, the violators of what we were being scolded for. And folks who received that email and who all along were doing the right thing felt very frustrated by getting the naughty email when they didn't feel as they felt. So not only did they not get reinforcement for doing what was expected of them, they got scolded for something they didn't do. And we're no different than students at the end of the day. Students want to be reinforced. They want to be noticed for the things that they're doing well. And what will happen typically is when you're reinforcing the positives, other students who have yet to do what you've asked will start to do it too, and you won't have to say a word. So you do reinforcement as much as possible. If reinforcement isn't working for a few, then or for many in some cases, you would move to remind. Remind is without judgment. It's without tone if you can help it. Even though if you've been doing a lot of reinforcing, it might be hard not to get frustrated. It's supposed to be without tone, just simply restating the directions or remodeling the directions. You know the student that you can go over and you can kind of open their page for them, and that gentle reminder is enough to get them back on track. You know the students that you might just be able to say, we need to turn to page 62 right now, thank you. And that's enough. And so reminding would be next. But you want to reinforce 4 times more often than you need to remind. And then even less so, you want to be able to rely on redirection last. So if you think about redirecting, we're humans, so we tend to go to redirect first. We tend to notice what's wrong before we notice what's right. You could have 5 positive experiences, and then that one negative thing that happens, somebody butts you in line at the grocery store. That's what you remember when you walk out of the store. You don't remember the 3 people who waved you on in traffic or the positive small things that happened on your way to the store. You're now fixated on the fact that that person was very rude to you. That's our human nature unless we expressly and purposefully try to flip that script. So redirection comes when a student, or it comes for the whole class if most of them need a redirect. This could be if several of them were being unsafe. Maybe you had break time and several of them were out of their seat and you felt like the whole class were seated in silence. Just a brief redirect for the whole group. But redirect can also happen in small group or individually. And if you have to redirect, that's actually how it works best, if you can. So pulling the one student aside and figuring out what's going on, what about the directions are they struggling with, and how can you best support them? You're really asking them, what do you need? And again, it's not with judgment. It's not like, what do you need now? Which I know is hard to sometimes keep our frustration out of it. But to the degree that you can, a redirect is a true, genuine, honest question. What do you need? Because you're trying to think about how you can assist them in getting that need met. So now that we're there, I wanted to pause a little bit and allow Amanda to talk us through a few of the behaviors that you listed as sort of those behaviors that really frustrate you.
Okay, we have some excellent crunchy behaviors in the chat. I can feel it just reading it. So some examples, intentionally disrupting other students who are working, being on the phone, checking grades from another class, or really doing anything on the phone. Impatience with technology, which I think we might also reframe as giving up.
So let me stop you there for a second and just go back to the first one you said, which you said was intentionally interrupting students who are working.
Yep.
Do I have that accurately?
Correct.
Okay, so I want you to think about this behavior instead of a behavior. I want you to think about it as a need. And if you want to, just off of this behavior on your T-chart, jot as many needs as you think might be represented in this behavior. So right away, the first one that comes to my mind is attention. There's others underneath that. So it could certainly be to hide a skill deficit. If I don't want anybody else to know that I don't know what we're supposed to be doing, or I don't know how to do the thing we're supposed to be doing, then I'll disrupt everybody and then no one will notice. It could be that, which is still kind of loosely linked to attention too, right? Getting everybody's attention to you to take it off of the thing you don't want them to notice. But if you think of that need, that behavior of intentional distractions of others, it is often attached to attention. How do you fill that need while simultaneously preventing what's happening? So thinking about that student, because probably if they do it once, it's not a one-hit wonder. This is probably something this student does somewhat frequently during your class. You probably do have some academic assessments on them already. So you might see if it's connected to academics, if they have some need in the academic area that would make the work that you're assigning them hard to do. We can talk about things you can do there too. But the other thing is, if you feel you have any equity built with that child whatsoever, you can ask them, what do you need? Do you know what I mean? You can see as that clearly might be a redirect time, because you've probably already reinforced, you've probably already reminded, and this one student is taking it to the next step. But there's lots of things that I do with attention. One of the first things I do with attention, I do before they even get in the room. And we can talk more specifically when we start to talk about restorative practices, what you can do by design. And for my secondary folks, I often get, we don't have enough time. And I would argue back, not argue, debate politely back. There's too much arguing going on in the world. So I would debate politely back to you, you don't have the time not to. If you don't invest the time now, when you most need it, you'll lose tons of instructional time dealing with behaviors like the ones you just mentioned. So I would give them that attention right up front before they even got in the room with a temperature check, with a check-in, Some of my teachers use Google Forms to do that as well. So the minute the students know, they come in, they know part of the routine is to do the temperature check on the Google form. Then the teacher can quickly pull up the results of the Google form, and she kind of has a sense of who's feeling what before class even started. But certainly, why not just have a brief conversation with as many kids as you can as they enter the room? And you'll give that specific student some presets, if depending on what presets you think they need. Now, if this attention is attached to academics, those presets can come in the form of academic presets. Today, we're going to be doing X, and the supports you have are already set up on the corner of your desk. Things that wouldn't maybe call unnecessary negative attention to them, but that would be supports. I have the shouter outers. I don't know if that's an actual term, but you know who I'm talking about, the kids who shout out. And that's often an attention based need as well. And so sometimes I would give them post-its as they walked in the room, and I'd say, when you have the urge to share, I want you to stop and jot all of those urges. And I'm going to check in with you multiple times today. And periodically, I'm going to share one of your post-its with the entire class. So I assure them they're going to get their need met, but they're going to get their need met in a modified way that also meets my need. And I'm very honest with them. Here's what I need. So I'm willing to give. I'm absolutely willing to give to all my students, but I also sometimes have some gets that I need. And so I'll be honest, especially depending on the age of the student, how I would tackle this, but certainly a secondary student, an upper elementary student, I would be honest with them about what my gets are and how their needs negatively impact me. But again, without emotion, without judgment, letting them know, I get that you need that. And I understand that need. And I want to support you in that need. And here's what I need. So how do we work together to bring our needs to the same place? The technology question, oh man, so we've come so far, but yet sometimes we're so far behind, right? And so what reason is it that they would be checking their phones? There's so many reasons, right? And so like sometimes one of the solutions, right, for me anyway, would be to give a scheduled cell phone break. Now, if cell phones are absolute no, and I know they still are in some buildings, like students are expected to put them in their lockers or whatever, um, that might not be a viable option for you, but a viable option might be to just give permission from, if you're having a 5-minute break in the class, that this is when, cell phones will be put away and here's why, but from this minute to this minute, you're going to have that moment, and sort of giving them permission that that that's going to be an issue for them. And so you want to deal with that issue head on. If it's a single student or a small number of students, I suggest you deal with that behavior a lot like the first one, that you have a redirect moment with them where you really talk about, sometimes those might be innocent. A student might really be nervous about their outcomes in a certain class. They might be struggling in a certain class, and you being able to hold that information would be important. I hope you can see the connection between, you're actually building relationships when you're resolving these problem behaviors. You actually can make these be like a 2-for-1. Who doesn't love a BOGO sale, right? These can be like your BOGO, because you get a moment to connect with that student and understand what's going on in their life while simultaneously addressing something that's happening in the class that's not working for everybody. So I hope that gives you just a little taste of the ideas, and I'm going to delve deeper into restorative practices, so hopefully you can see how this is a companion. So restorative practices at the tier 1 level are about community building. Man, oh man, do relationships matter more than ever. And I was in the earlier presentation with Dr. Rios, I believe, in Love, and they were talking about, ways to digitally connect through TikTok and through other means. How are you going to digitally connect with your students if we're in a hybrid or fully virtual situation with them? And it's so important, right? Because what my students were expressing when we went full remote and it wasn't really remote, it was virtual. If you define remote as some live instruction or live streaming, and you define virtual as they learn on their own, first pre-recorded or preloaded Google Classroom or whatever platform you're learning. We were basically virtually instructing. There wasn't a whole lot of opportunity for exchange. And when there was, students had their avatars on for many justifiable reasons. To just assume everybody take your avatar off, everybody turn your camera on, wasn't a logical assumption for us to make. There was lots of reasons why students didn't have their camera, their video recording going. So as you think about that, building relationships has now become of the greatest importance. Social emotional wellness has become so significant. As you know, the population that you may already be aware of that are have experienced adverse childhood experiences and are facing, the effects of trauma, they need us to virtually build relationships more than ever, because in all likelihood, if it's recurring trauma, and you know what I mean, that student who you say goodbye to them every day, and that um, reportable situations set aside for a minute, as we're all mandated reporters, I fully understand the gravity of that, but I mean, you just know that their night might be uncertain and they may face tough things across their week. That now becomes so significant when we don't get to ever see them in person, or we only partially get to see them in person. So I want you to think about, how do you achieve the bullets that you see in the PowerPoint: proactive, strong relationships, repair relationships when the damage is done, and to identify the root causes when the relationship is damaged, and strategies and needs that will change those behaviors. So as you think about that, in a remote situation, how do you offer these restorative practice features? So just take a second to pause and think about that. And in the chat, if you wouldn't mind throwing out some of the ideas that you used from March to June already, or if you've been tossing around ways to do this summer that you're going to try something new, put those in the chat. What do you think? How are you going to work on relationship building in a virtual situation or a remote? So the needs assessment, much like the last time, the needs assessment is a T-chart, and it's simply for you to be able to accomplish the bullets on the previous slide, to be able to have circles that build community, circles that repair harm, and needs assessment that help you understand the student behavior, identify the root causes, and therefore strategies and solutions. You have to think about your behavior. And I don't mean that with any sarcasm whatsoever, but I mean that as genuinely as we all can reflect. Sometimes I'm quick to respond, and I think I know the answer before I hear out what the other person has to say. And so I know that would be a behavior I would put in the teacher column that I have to work on. So kind of thinking about, for restorative practices to be in place in your classroom and in your school, what are the student behaviors you need to see? What are the teacher behaviors? And for some of the teacher behaviors, you might want to highlight or make notice of the personal behaviors that you have to work on. And I just told you one of mine. I have to seek to understand at a far greater rate than I seek to be understood, if that makes sense. Do much less talking, although all I'm doing, I know, is talking at you. So I apologize for that. Much less talking and much more listening. So that being said, the chat for me pops up for a second. So I did get to see a few of your ideas. And I love what one participant said around one-to-one meets. I know that feels super overwhelming, because especially if you're at the secondary level, you have quite large rosters, right? You might be packed at 30 if you're doing a hybrid model, 15 in, 15 at home, and then changing days. And so, doing 150 one-to-one Google Meets might not be doable for you. But as a school system, if you think about that one, because I love, love, love that suggestion. If it's all about relationships, how are you going to build a relationship with your students if you don't have that time and access to them that you would normally have under typical circumstances? So what we're doing is we are taking our entire student body and dividing it up with every single solitary adult, even my school secretary's willing. And it gives about 7 to 10 students per adult. And on Wednesdays, we're calling it What I Need Wednesdays at this point. That could change. Many parts of the plan, as you know, change without us even having any say. And then other parts change when we get a new demand or a new expectation, either from the CDC, Department of Health, or Department of Education, or the governor. We've created our master schedule more times than I can count and then created it again. We're taking fifth grade for the first time too. So doing a lot of things to try to meet all the demands. And in doing so, one of I'd say one of the meetings that we had with parents where we give parent voice, they asked for us to please have a single point of contact as that their child's check in, check out, or check and connect person. So that's what we're doing. And so that I don't have enough teachers to do that alone. So every single staff member, anybody that works in the building that's willing, because if they're not willing, that's a harder thing because you don't want someone begrudging the fact that they have to contact students and families. But everyone that's willing, which is almost all of my people, we're in a pandemic, they get it. Human connection is critical. They will be on Wednesdays connecting with every single one of their students, both one-to-one and in small group, and doing some of the social emotional learning from a program called Character Strong that we chose to go forward with because from March to now, they have rapidly been creating a virtual platform for their pre-existing social emotional learning. So I love that. I saw some other ideas, but Amanda, do you mind picking a few that might be themed around what folks are doing to build relationships with their students?
Yeah, it's interesting. Almost all of the suggestions revolve around giving more personal and one-on-one time to students, being more responsive, making sure that you acknowledge their work in a more personal way, adding specific comments to their work so that they know that you're really hearing them, phone calls or chats with older students. I mean, all of this just involves teachers giving a lot of personal time and attention to students, which is, I think, really moving.
It's awesome. And well, first of all, thank you for that. We, as I always felt, pre-pandemic, educators are truly the heroes of society and deserve to hold their place in society as such. We literally groom the future. We are literally predictors of the future success of society. We have an amazing opportunity and awe-inspiring power. And so all of the things that you mentioned, I believe wholeheartedly are really the only ways. But one of the things that Dr. Rios said in his midday presentation through his research at the high school level, students said less homework, more home care. And our students that we have on the reopening committee asked us for block scheduling. It wasn't an overly popular decision with all of our staff. It presents a major change in a time when we're trying to control as many changes as we can because there's so many things we cannot control. But it was really for that sole purpose of give me less to do each day because if I'm home navigating a 9-period day, I'm really, really overwhelmed. And so how can I go more deeply with less? And so to your point around the ways that you'll be making one-to-one contact or, that personalized care with kids, starting every class period with a restorative practice round. It can be the temperature check we spoke of, like the weather report, where are you at? And you can do that and give students a variety of ways to give their input. So maybe it's in the chat, maybe it's in a Google document that you can comment, maybe it's out loud, the volunteers, the kids that would be willing to share with the group, maybe it's simultaneously 3 or 4 different ways. So you hit every type of learner. My youngest daughter is in high school and her psychology teacher had a COVID journal. And at first, I really believed that she thought it was just one more thing to do in a space filler that she didn't want to deal with all the assignments. I mean, she was literally trying to self-teach chemistry and algebra too, and it wasn't going super well. for her, just like I'm sure if you were a mom or a dad or an aunt or uncle or anyone who was helping children learn from home, you were faced with all those same challenges of trying to be educator and homeschool teacher in content that maybe you haven't looked at or taught or remember even how to do when you were a kid. And so this COVID journal became, through the process over time, very cathartic, and her teacher was writing back to her or commenting. She was using the comment feature to sort of interact about the things that were most difficult or challenging in COVID for my child. And what it resulted in at the end of all of this is she asked her counselor, her guidance counselor, if that teacher taught what senior classes that teacher taught. And she chose her elective based on the teacher. Not because the teacher was easy, not because the teacher assigned less, but because she knew she had a connection with this teacher because the responses in the comments were so caring. So I think there's lots of ways that, and I thank you for sharing some of the ways that you are connecting with kids. And I'll just move on to some of the fundamentals to implementing restorative practices and give you an opportunity to ask questions about any implementation that you're wondering. But as you're thinking about restorative practices, above all of this is the buy-in. If you've been in education for a while, you know that there's always naysayers in the community, in your school community. PBIS is just a party at the end of the month, or just because they didn't get a referral, why should they get to go to the celebration? You probably know all the anti arguments, and restorative practices have them as well. One that's most frustrating for me is that restorative practices lack accountability. My experience has been that the accountability is more real and it's more logical when it's embedded into restorative practices. So let me give you a little example. Harm circles. Well, you don't want to do harm circles with an entire class unless the problem is caused by almost the entire class. So, like, for example, if almost the whole class is always late, then that harm circle could be with everybody because that makes sense. It's a problem that most students are contributing to. But if it's like a small handful of students or an individual student, you don't want the whole class to participate in that harm circle because it's kind of like, here's the 18 of us who are all doing well and the 2 of you who aren't. But you do want to have that harm circle with you, where the harm has been done, those 2 parties have to be there. The student needs an ally. That ally can be a peer. We have a leadership team, a student leadership team. They become a bank of allies that can be invited to those meetings. You also want to ensure that there is some type of preparation and rehearsal for harm circles. As a circle keeper, it can be scary because you don't really know. I could tell you briefly what happened when I jumped too quickly into having a harm circle. Often I can't be the circle keeper if I'm the one who gave consequences, especially if those consequences, I won't say I can't, but I would often ask one of my other staff to be the circle keeper in the event where I might have given consequences, because in that case, I might be part of the harm, right? So I want to have the opportunity to participate in the circle, but not as the circle keeper who holds that non-judgmental place. So as you think about harm circles, you really are having that child and the adult accept responsibility for their roles in the harm. And there's nothing more accountable than that. And it's authentic accountability and responsibility rather than the artificial accountability and responsibility that we try to give students when we suspend them. So I've moved somewhat, and I know our time is running out. So as you're reading this, I'm going to give the last few minutes to any additional questions I didn't get to or thoughts. But what I've moved away from is the traditional suspension or excluding, pulling kids out, to more of what we call a structured day with a visual schedule where that student is included to the greatest degree in all of the places that they can be, and only excluded from the places where the harm has yet to be repaired, with a specific plan and timeline for how and when that harm will be repaired so that everybody involved knows. And when I do a structured day for a student, I do it with teacher support. So I don't just send them back to all their classes and hope the teachers understand why I'm doing that. I have the teachers help me build the structured day, and I have the check in, check out folks, or the folks who have a connection with that student, maybe be the place where that student goes for the parts where they might be excluded temporarily, instead of the traditional places we might send an excluded kiddo, right? Because the harm just widens when we do that. And the likelihood that they'll enter into the harm circle with an open mind narrows when we do that. So I give the student a say about their visual schedule. They help me build it, and I give the adults a say. So I'm going to just sort of take a pause to give you a chance to ask any final questions or offer up any final thoughts. I know I threw a lot at you. I've also added my email and my contact information. You can feel free, if the questions come to you later, to reach out to me at any point, and I'd be happy to share with you anything, any additional information that I didn't get a chance to in this presentation.
I would love to know if people have any particular rewards, particularly non-food rewards, or logical consequences that they've had really good success with.
To me or in the chat?
In the chat.
Okay.
The chat's very quiet right now.
That's okay. I think the hard part is, and this is very telling for me, this platform, and I guess with the number of people, made it really hard for this to be interactive. You have to assume folks' engagement because I can't see anybody's faces too. So it's really challenging. So it's note to myself and to all of us as educators, when we have this type of situation, how do we sort of ensure those things can happen? But I did see one comment about virtual rewards being a challenge, and I can address that a little. The program we are choosing to go with is called Character Strong, that I mentioned before. I'm not a promoter for them. I don't get any kickbacks for promoting them or anything like that. But what I will tell you is that they have what they call character dares across the week. It was started as a high school program, and then the co-founder joined with an elementary person, so it goes all the way down to the earliest grades and all the way up to 12th grade. But if I look at it from a secondary perspective for a minute, one of the things that could be used as incentive base around these character dares and these administrator dares, because there's admin dares too, things for me to do. We did a virtual bingo board, and it was a virtual self-care. So you would choose the things on the bingo board that you wanted to do to make bingo. And when you made bingo, it could be, a virtual lunch date with a staff member of their choosing. I know that's not always sought after for every kid, but for some kids, that was a sought after virtual incentive. But some of it was things that we can do when we regroup. So, like coupons for the school store, coupons for the staff snack cart, like things like that. I made a coupon book for teacher appreciation and mailed it to every teacher, every staff member. And they'll be able to redeem those when we're back in person, even if it's just us back in person or we're partially back in person. Some of them I'm a little worried how I'm going to actually execute, because one of them was additional break time, but I'm going to do my best to do it. And my assistant principal will help me. So if you think outside the box, many of those didn't cost me anything, or cost me, I mean, I did just mention a food one, I know, but that was for adults. But many of the other ones were low cost. And the
Someone
bingo board
posted
is a great way.
Someone
But
posted in the chat that they offer a mini dance party at the end of class where the kids get to choose the song. I love that idea.
it's amazing. And I kind of was thinking some things that Dr. Rios was saying, that we could do like TikTok challenges for teachers. Like if the student earns X, you'll do a TikTok challenge. I mean, I love to make a fool of myself publicly. I don't at all, but it's a way to show them vulnerability, right? And so anything like that. And some of our youngest staff are great partners with some of our more veteran staff like me, who maybe don't have the experience on Snapchat or TikTok or some of the other platforms that you have. So I will end it there. Thank you so, so much, because I'm not seeing any more questions, but I am seeing more ideas, which is great. Thank you for that. Awesome. And I want to thank you for your time. And again, just restate, if you have any questions, you want any further ideas, or you need any follow-up, feel free to reach out to me. I really appreciate your time, and you are amazing for coming through during this pandemic and being here today. Love it. Have a great, great rest of your day. And thanks again. And Amanda, thank you to you too.
Thanks, Laura. Bye, everybody.
Bye. I was like, thank you so much for all your help. I tried to be a little bit more interactive that time. I'm sorry. I don't know.
It's so hard. And we did balloon back up to 53 people, which is the same as what we had the first time.
And I couldn't see anybody, so I had no idea if they were like tuning me out.
Yeah, I can't. The keynote actually asked the BOCES people if there was any way that he could see his participants, and they said, no, that's not a feature of WebEx. You can't see the participants, only the panelists. So.
It's fine. I mean, there were features about this that I liked. I'm enjoying getting to know the different platforms at our disposal, so we can make more educated decisions about how to best do it with kids. But if you hear of more, or you want more information through your colleagues, feel free to let me know. I have the hardest thing for me to do is to pare it down to what, do you go broad or do you go deep with fewer? And I tried to go broad to honor for choice, but what I would normally have loved to do was get a sense of what levels my participants were at, and what, in addition to what levels, sort of like what their prior experiences were. So if they had a ton of experience with one of the things I was talking about, I could have either omitted that, or, if you're really new to the field, you probably don't have a ton of experience with PBIS because it might have died in places.
Yep.
But if you've been around a long time, you've probably had multiple experiences with
Been around the loop with it. There was one attendee who posted that she hasn't actually started teaching yet. Like, this is going to be her first year. Can you imagine how hard that would be?
And she probably wanted so much more of the responsive classroom stuff, because that's really how you get your room ready.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure. So if you hear of more of that, or people, honestly, I'm a certified responsive classroom trainer only because in order to do it to my staff, give it to my staff, responsive classroom required you to get certified. Otherwise, I was like copyright infringement or whatever. So I'm certified to do that. And I don't know if there's a certification for this, but I worked with the court system the past 2 summers to become a certified circle keeper. I don't know if that's the term for it, but to become trained for youth court and to work in restorative circles and harm circles. So I'm lucky in that way. That's why Schenectady was such a good teacher, because Schenectady afforded me bazillions of professional development opportunities to be lead. And so they would sort of train me as the trainer, and then I'd come back and give the PD to everybody else. And I feel like I would be happy to continue to share that kind of work with folks, even though I'm not still a direct part of the community. So just let me know.
Oh, well, Schenectady is like a lab for whatever the latest techniques and experiments are in urban education. And I love that about it. All of the people who posted challenging behaviors were from Schenectady. And there's probably other people who aren't used to seeing the kinds of like really hardcore behaviors that we do on a daily basis.
I hope that people were it resonated with them to shift, if they don't already, to shift their thinking about every behavior as a need rather than a willful annoyance, because I think that's where we run into trouble when it's mindset for us. And it's also resilience. I wish I wished them a ton of resilience, because that's part of it. Those behaviors start to feel really badly. You start to feel like, can I even do this job? Like, do kids even like me? Like, why aren't they responding in the way, like, I'm putting my heart and soul into my lesson and they're on their phone? You know what I mean? Oh, the phone is such a hard competitor. Like, I literally give them permission. Some of my staff hate that about me, like despise me for it, because they think it's so wrong. But I literally feel like if I give them permission in a brief phone break, they respect the no phone when I demand no phone. It's such a hard fine balance. And at most high schools don't even have specific set, like the kids can have their cell phone. What are they going to do? Otherwise, are they going to go into a full-on restraint to give the kid to give their phone up? Because children, my own child, it's such a like shaking addiction, like a drug addiction. Do you know what I mean? I'm like, are you going to get the shakes if I take it away? And
Yes.
that I
Ouch.
truly feel like that's how she is. She's like, it's my life. I was like, what? It's so, that's so sad. This can't
Let
be.
that happen in just one generation.
There has to be a better life for you than
Yes.
it's not real, I try to tell her. So anyway, if there's any, I am happy to participate in more brainstorming. I wish I got to spend more time with that sticky part of behavior so that they could see. I really believe for every challenging behavior, there's a bank of things that we could do differently, that will work for 99% of the students, even the tier 3 children. But hopefully we'll get there. And best of luck to you. Best of luck, because these are crazy times and it's hard to be a counselor when you don't get to see your kids.
I know, I miss them so much.
I know. I just met with the new high school science teacher yesterday because he teaches one section of middle school. And we elbow bumped, and it was like I felt, like you said, I felt horrible for him. He's never taught before. He's just out of college. And I hired not one, but two new music teachers, and one of them is fresh out of college as well. And she's like now tasked with teaching music without singing or instrument playing. Because to sing, they said 12 feet apart, and we just don't have the space. And she takes them outside, at least for the next few months, and they can't touch the instruments unless she figures out some cleaning protocol between every class. And I'm not sure it's viable
Oh,
because she would be touching them. It's hard. And so I'm like, hello, welcome to the field. How do you teach music with no music? Like
right.
with no ability to, no performance base, at least when we're in person. I suppose she could do performance based when they're home, right? They could sing to her through the computer, but how many kids feel comfortable with that scenario? So I agree with you. The new teachers are facing it head on in a way that they, maybe though in other ways they'll be better at it.
Maybe they'll be
Because
fearless by the time this is
it's like the only way they'll know. They won't be as ingrained as we are. I had to make a commitment, like a serious commitment, to stop multitasking during Google Meets, like a come to Jesus with myself. Because what was happening in meetings was I was being given administrative tasks and then I wouldn't know I had a task. And I'd be like, when did that happen? And they were like, in the meeting. And I was like, it did? And I was like, oh my God, I must have totally zoned out so badly that I didn't even, but it was so hard in the beginning. And I'd have my email open and I was just like, and I have to imagine if it's challenging for us, it's challenging for children. And for my own children, because they were both learning virtually, one in college, one in high school, we were fighting in the beginning horribly because my husband would come home and referee. He was like, I am now a referee because they wouldn't wake up. And I'd be like, tick tock, the whole day is going by and you have so much to do. And I'm micromanaging your schedules and I'm freaking out. It was awful. And finally, like I was doing incentives. I was doing PBIS on my kids.
Oh my gosh.
And that's why I think as a remote learning community, we have to think about that, because what really is the incentive for the student to get up at 7:30, and does that even make sense, and get on the computer to go to first period?
And it's so developmentally natural for teenagers to sleep a ridiculous amount. Like after the first 2 weeks, we just stopped trying to reach any of our kids before 1 p.m. every day. Like, we just don't even bother. Do paperwork in the morning, kid stuff in the afternoon.
It's crazy though, right? Because we're wired so completely differently because we were forced to join the workforce
Opposites
for so
attract.
many years that I was like, I had students emailing me at 11. I
Oh my
I
God.
said to them, I said to one, I was like, Jaya, I've been in bed since, by the time you email me, I'm not seeing that till the next day when you're still in bed and I've been awake for 3 hours. We were having a hard time connecting because they wanted to connect with me at midnight. And I was like, I'm gonna have to drink like a Red Bull or something to be up at midnight.
Oh my God.
It's crazy. So
It's so funny when they say, sorry for texting so late, but I really need your help with this at 2 in the morning. Oh, dude, sorry for texting so late does not cover it at 2 in the morning. Like, are you bleeding? Are you in the street dying?
Yeah, sorry for texting so early because I'm not up yet, but I've actually been asleep since 9 p.m. And my daughter that receives services, I have to plan something amazing for her special education teacher because she ended up being the savior of all. It wasn't me. We were fighting. We were having to do counseling appointments with the school social worker. And I said to the social worker at one point, "You're counseling me, aren't you?" She was like giving me parenting stress. Because she was kind of like, "You're dying on this hill and it doesn't matter how much you try to force her. Like, it's not working. Why do you keep doing it? Like, stop doing it." Because I was the definition of insanity, right? And so I was like, all right, give me more parenting advice. I need that. So we sort of made a commitment, Megan and I, that we wouldn't talk before 10 a.m. I would never come in her room and try to force her out of bed before 10. And that I would, but her special education teacher was her savior. She started to come over.
Wow.
Once they started to lift some of it and you could be socially distanced outside and not like groups of, I don't know, I think it was 25 by then, she started to come over and sit with Megan on our back deck. And I would go out there and say to her, "Kelly, you need to leave. I feel horrible." It'd be like 87 degrees, so hot. I'd be bringing her out Diet Pepsi because that's what she likes to drink. And I was like, "I feel so guilty." And she's like, "No, I'm staying till every assignment she has this week is done." And I was like, I never would have been able to do that and get my kid to sit there for 5 hours with me. She thinks this is what she told her guidance counselor. "I have two requests." And she named her special ed teacher and her psychology teacher. And she said, and her English teacher. It was all teacher based. "These are the three people I must have my senior year, especially if we're virtual. And anything else you do to me, I don't care." She's language exempt and going to take college level Spanish because he wants her to. And she couldn't wait for the day when she didn't have to take Spanish anymore. She took it just to get an advanced Regents. And she didn't have to take the Regents. It was beautiful. It was one of those silver linings. I should have put that. No Regents. So she is now an advanced Regents diploma earner because she has no more advanced Regents credits left to earn. She's earned them all. And he said, "I'd like you to take college level Spanish in the event that where you want to go has a language requirement. Maybe you won't have to do it and you'll be able to do it with your IEP still intact." And, he convinced her. And so she said, "If I do that for you, if I agree to that, I get this teacher this." And he said, okay. It was like amazing. They actually all teach senior classes. So she is ready to, for either scenario. And Kelly, the sweetest special ed teacher in America, is ready to come over. She's going to help her write a resume for college. I was like, "You are the best person. I just adore her." So anyway, I wish you the same success in being able to connect with your kids and figure out how we navigate this minefield. Do you think, because you guys proposed hybrid as well, right?
Yeah, we gave the students the choice. They can either do hybrid or all virtual. And so far, it looks like a large majority is choosing all virtual. But Schenectady, it's taking forever to get all the responses in. And we're making phone calls and we're tracking people down. And
We have the opposite results.
yeah,
So we have about 79% of the, I don't know, we had more than 60%, I think, back already on the second day.
oh
Because
my
we're
God.
doing mixed. So like Bethlehem area. So because we're the town of Bethlehem, half of the town of Bethlehem. So that's very suburban like and more of what you would consider the haves of
Yeah.
our district. And they're very vocal. It's a very vocal portion of our community. So those participants got back right away. They were chomping at the bit, "Where's the survey?" And then our rural side is still with some wealth, if you will, big farms, but ranch type horse farm, like, or big homes, like really nice homes. They're just separated. They got a lot of acreage, like estates, if you will. So we have a whole nother, like probably third of the population who does have all their basic needs met and more than they could ever possibly. And they were very vocal as well. And they are board members and they participate. And then, we have another third that is we're about at the middle level, we're just under 50% poverty. And so the one elementary school is at like 30 and the other elementary school is like at 70 because we're kind of like segregated. The same thing that happens like when I taught at Lincoln, we were at 98% and Page and Zoller were very, very different. And I was like, we're still segregated and we're in the same district. And I didn't have new play, Paige had a brand new playground, Zoller had a brand new cafeteria, and we were disgusting. Like what we had was really rough.
Yeah.
And it was sad, you know what I mean? But I didn't have a whole lot of vocal folks in the community coming in and sort of advocating. It was just me sometimes, or just me and the staff. But anyway, it's about 79% said in person so far.
Wow, that's interesting.
And they want to know sports, they want to know ensembles, they want to know, you know, and I don't think it's worse. We're also unique that we're partially Greene County and partially Albany County. We actually reside in two counties.
Oh,
So our Greene County, it's almost like they think COVID isn't real. It didn't hit their community very hard, I guess, because whereas some of our folks are Albany County and many work in the workforce where we were hit very hard. You know what I mean? And some of our staff and our community members were hit. And so they're probably much more cautious. They see the effects of it and they're more cautious. But the Greene County's like, why can't we have sports? Like, they're very angry about why aren't you doing 5 days? Why do we have to, just a lot of pushback on things that the CDC and the Department of Health are requiring, or we can't go back.
that's so interesting. I was certain that the more affluent families would be more concerned about safety and want to be more cautious, and the families struggling with poverty would want to send the kids back to school because of childcare and supervision, and
Me too.
who
But
knows?
it's been quite different for us. Some of my most vocal PTSO parents, they want to go back, but they want me to keep them in one room. They don't want any passing of classes, which I can do, but the high school can't, because they can't run kids in cohorts because they all take so many different things. So they have to do passing of class, but they could stagger. I mean, there's some creativity they could do, but for us, it's like 5 hours in a room. And I think parents they feel that that's largely safe. The elementary and the middle school are getting a higher rate of yes than the high school. Um, so we'll see, but the final commitment isn't due to us till the 21st. So the survey's just to give us an idea. They actually have to put in writing what they are going to do by the 21st. So that gives us some time. Your canvassing job is much harder because
Yeah.
you can't assume silence as either scenario, right? You can't assume if they don't get back to you that means they're not going to come.
I think eventually we're going to have to assume that silence is choosing virtual, which is the more conservative option, and then just hope that they go along with that. But yeah. And we can't do our master schedule until we get everybody's choice locked in, because we are not going to have the kids move class to class. We're going to have the teachers move, which means they have to be grouped into like pods.
That's so hard because, like, I think about all the different scenarios where a sophomore takes 2 years worth of math, or,
Yeah.
it's really, what makes me so sad is all the progress we made with tracking many, many years ago away from tracking.
Oh my
And
God, you're
now
right. This is literal tracking.
it's tracking. We're going backward to say, you are these kids. And so if you get services, you're going to be with all the students that get services, because I don't have another way to schedule you and not make you move. And I'm not talking self-contained. I'm talking kids who are in the least restrictive, but they still have to be scheduled that way. Whereas movement, but you're humongous. So movement's a literal nightmare. When we go half staff, we're talking 300 kids that we could stagger, and we could ring one bell for each grade, or there'd be ways to make it a little bit safer. How would you guys do that with the volume? It's so much.
Yeah.
And I think for me, the biggest pushback parents are giving me is, how am I going to control the other kids? I'm not. Like, my option, if they decide not to wear a mask when I become aware of it, is to tell them, you've now been designated to remote learning until further notice.
Yeah.
Like, that's the other sad thing. We went away from zero tolerance because it didn't work. And now everybody in the community is like, zero tolerance.
Yeah. And
One time and
exclusion.
they're out. Right?
Exclusion is your first go-to punishment.
Get out. Go home and never come back because you didn't wear your mask. Because I'm really worried. We have a ton of Trump supporters.
Ooh.
A ton. and they are not embarrassed to like proudly wave the flag in the back. I had to address a high school student with the Confederate flag. I was like, clearly you don't recognize the student body at large. Like you are not sole representative of the student body and you're on our property, so we do get a say. Freedom of speech has its limits. But I have adults who are conspiracy theory, like a third of the population. I go walking when I'm waiting for my daughter to get out of work and I see Trump signs on every other lawn and I'm like, oh no. So if I'm a student, I may choose to take a stance that I'm not going to wear my mask for this conspiracy. There's no money. We're a cashless society. I'm going to, I don't know, hoard my coins and not wear my mask.
Oh
I'm like saying to the parents, I'm not going to be able to control that other than say, if you refuse to wear your mask, you'll be sent to remote learning for good. I don't know. So it's nerve wracking, but do you agree with this theory? Because this is what our data coordinator really believes. She thinks that the governor is giving us insurmountable challenges, like testing everybody before we can return, and like the medical challenges, so that we'll fail, so that he can say we're not going to open, but it won't be on him. It'll be on us. We
wow,
can't
that would be
open.
really.
We can't open because the schools didn't make the mark. They didn't do what they needed to do.
Wow. That would just be like the most despicable political posturing imaginable. I had not thought of that yet.
She planted that seed to me, and I was like, we have been killing ourselves this summer. If it's all for naught, just tell me now so I can preserve a shred of sanity. But all right, well, I will let you go. Good luck in your new apartment and getting settled in, and then your next new apartment in a few
Yes.
or in a month, right? September, you said.
Yeah.
And I really mean it from the bottom of my heart. If anybody needs anything, feel free to email me or text me or call me.
I will. It's great to have a resource for that. Thank you so much for everything.
Have a great one. Take care.
You too. Bye bye.